I'm Patricia Izichi, and this is Proactive Empowered Careers, a space for thinking about careers differently, not as something separate from who you are, but as an expression of you and the life you want to live. Hello, everyone. So in the last episode, we talked about something quite specific. That moment when you start recognizing yourself again. You start to notice you have energy for certain conversations. You notice certain ideas interest you again. You notice moments where you feel more like yourself. And when that starts happening, something else often appears too. A question. And it's usually a very simple one. It's this: what else might be possible? Now, that question doesn't arrive as a plan or a decision. Most of the time, it's just a thought that crosses your mind. Something like, I wonder if I could do something different. Or, I've always been curious about this. Or sometimes even, I don't think I want to keep doing this anymore. Nothing dramatic, just possibility entering the conversation. And this moment is actually really important. Because possibility doesn't show up when our thinking is crowded. It needs space to emerge. The kind of space we talked about before, where your mind isn't just responding to everything. It has room to wander and explore a little. That's when possibility starts to show up. Because for a lot of people, before this point, their thinking can be quite constrained. They've been thinking about their lives within a very specific set of assumptions. What is realistic? What someone like me does? What my qualifications allow? What my responsibilities allow? What would make sense to other people? And those assumptions aren't wrong. They're usually based on real life and what we see and observe around us in our everyday life. But those assumptions do narrow our field of vision. And when our thinking is that narrow, we don't always see possibility reflected back to us. You might not see it around you. You might not hear it in the conversations you're part of. And that can make it easy to dismiss even when it's there. But when people start reconnecting with themselves again, something else happens. Their thinking widens slightly too. They start noticing possibilities they hadn't really allowed themselves to consider before. And that widening can be both exciting and uncomfortable. Because once you start seeing possibilities, you also start noticing the gap between where you are and where you could be. And that gap is not always an easy thing to see or to be with. And something else often happens at this stage. There's a pull to turn that possibility into a decision, to move from, this is interesting, I'll just think about it and explore these ideas for a while, to, what does this mean that I need to do right now? And you can feel the shift in energy and focus when it happens. Possibility moves from being something open and expansive to something that feels heavier. Because your thinking has shifted quickly from what if, from curiosity, to pressure and immediate action. And I'd love to share with you something here that my partner and I call having a brain treat. And it's something I've really fully adopted myself. And a brain treat is just allowing your mind to be unconstrained and untethered. You just let your mind have this treat of exploring and pondering what else is out there. Without an agenda, without having to anchor yourself to the thoughts, without having to make a decision about what you're thinking or have a plan of what you're going to do next. There's no pressure to turn any of that thinking into something real straight away. You're just allowing yourself space. Space to explore. And when you allow that, it feels surprisingly freeing because your thinking becomes less constrained, less tied to what's practical and expected, and more to what actually might be true for you in this moment and possible for you. We're so good at giving ourselves tasks, but not as good at giving ourselves space to think or space to dream. So you don't have to turn every possibility into a decision. In fact, it's usually better if you don't, because curiosity works differently from decision making. Curiosity needs space. Decision making tends to need certainty. So if you force curiosity to behave like a decision, it often disappears. So the most useful thing you can do at this stage is this. Simply let the question exist. What else might be possible? Not as something you have to answer immediately, but as a question that acts as a doorway for you to notice what comes through. Because that question often changes how you see your life. You start looking at things differently. You might notice a type of work that really interests you, or you might notice a conversation that sparks something in you, or parts of your current role that feel really good to you. You might notice things you don't want anymore, and gradually you start seeing that your life may not be as fixed as you once thought it was. Now, I'm not saying here by this that you suddenly have unlimited freedom. Most adults don't. We all have responsibilities. We have financial realities, people who depend on us, structures that exist for good reasons. But within those realities and within those structures, there is often more room than we initially think or give ourselves. It doesn't have to be unlimited room, but some room. And how much room you feel you have? It's shaped by all the things we explored earlier. The structure of your life, your energy, what your days actually look like. Because if everything is full, if there is no space to think, possibility becomes much harder to see. And recognizing that is really powerful because it reconnects us with something that often disappears when we feel stuck. And that's agency. The ability to shape and influence things gradually. To explore, to adjust, to experiment, to move slightly closer to the things that feel more like us. And this is where possibility is most powerful, not because it gives us answers, but because it increases our awareness. From thinking, this is just how my life is, to thinking there might be more options here than I realized. And that shift alone, it can change how we experience our situation. It softens that sense of being trapped and creates a bit more openness. And from that place of openness, we start to explore. We ask questions. We notice things. We try small things. We gather information. And that's how change actually begins. So if you found yourself asking that question, what else might be possible for me? You don't need to rush it. You don't need to answer it today, and you don't need to turn it into a plan. Just notice. Give yourself a brain treat and see what comes up. Because possibility is usually there long before any change happens. And it doesn't always arrive as an answer. Sometimes it arrives as a question you're willing to keep returning to again and again. So in the next episode, we'll talk about how change usually starts to feel in real life. Not with dramatic, massive shifts, but with small experiments. The kind of experiments that help you move forward without needing to have perfect certainty. But for now, Just notice the question. What else might be possible for me? So until we next speak, take the very best care of yourselves. This has been Proactive Empowered Careers. If today's episode resonated, follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss what comes next. And if this podcast is supporting you, leaving a short review helps others find these conversations. And remember, your career isn't separate from who you are. It's an expression of you and the life you want to live.